guests around the world. We are so excited to be together today because we have one of our great heroes.
And friends.
We'd call her a heroine, but that's a drug. So maybe she is a drug. I don't know. Certainly contagious, that's for sure. This is Crista Cowan, and we'll get back to talk about her, but we'd love to just say to all of you while you're watching, if you'll tell us where you're watching from, and if you have any questions, we'll get to you after the broadcast and check in and be able to just catch up with your life. So thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us. And as we start, I have this beautiful quote that I wanted to begin with, and it's from the landmark Family History Gathering Talk of Elder Gongs in April of 2022. And he says, "We each have a story. Come discover yours. Come find your voice, your song, your harmony in Him. This is the very purpose for which God created the heavens and the earth and saw that they were good." And today, Crista, we know that you understand more than most this beautiful statement, and that you continually give your time and your talents to help others find their stories. In fact, do you want to share your mantra with us?
Yeah, first, let's just tell you, she is the corporate genealogist for Ancestry. And this woman has done over 500 broadcasts and counting, and many more than that.
Yes.
And she is remarkable, the face of Ancestry, really, and making such a difference in the world. So what's the mantra that goes along with that makes sense?
Yeah, I have this hanging in my home and written on Post-its just about everywhere. And it is that my mission in life is to teach millions how to do family history so that billions can be saved.
Beautiful.
That is
so beautiful.
Literally true. Yeah.
And she's been with Ancestry since 2004. She kind of runs the company.
No.
She does her part, which is major. And I love this. Her involvement in family history reaches all the way back to childhood, to babyhood, really, right? When you used to be parked under a microfilm reader at the Family History Library, Search Library.
Nobody knows what that is anymore. We remember.
The way they used
to my parents, they both went to BYU, and my dad was an accounting major and my mom was an English major. So they had no classes together. They were, only a year and a half into their marriage. They had a new baby, and they thought, if we don't take at least one class together, we'll never see each other. And so they chose a family history class. And one Friday a month, they would take me in my baby carrier and head up to Salt Lake to the old, I think the family history collection was in the old church history building at the time, and park me under a microfilm reader. And that was how I spent many, many, months of my life, with my dad telling me stories every time he'd find them. So of course my parents take full credit for my career now.
Of course they do.
That's such a great story.
And since that time, she has spent, innumerable hours, right? Doing family history and helping other people discover and document and tell their stories. And she is now known as the barefoot genealogist.
And I am barefoot, always.
Oh, there you are. And she teaches genealogy conferences and does events around the world. She's everywhere online, and will be at Roots Tech presenting 4 classes. And we're looking forward to that. And that is, do you want to just tell us about Roots Tech a little bit?
Yeah, super excited. So we're less than a week out now.
Yes.
It's March 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. And if people haven't signed up yet, you can still sign up. If you live in the Intermountain West and want to come in person, there's a small fee to show up. You can find that on their website, or virtually, it's free. So from anywhere in the world, please join us, because lots of exciting things happening.
Oh, absolutely. One of our classes is a pre-recorded class, and it is going live on the 1st, I think, on that Wednesday. Nice. Yeah, it's why we need our family story more now than ever.
So let's talk about that, because you are the expert in stories. And love this idea. What is it about 5 words that helps us kind of begin or move ahead in our telling of a story?
It's interesting because so in my previous life, before I came to work at Ancestry, I worked for Stephen Covey, and so became kind of indoctrinated in his ideas. And one of the 7 habits is to begin with the end in mind. And one of the exercises you do is you write your own obituary, which I always found when I was in my 20s highly morbid. But now that I'm 50, I think about that. But I also find myself, just as a genealogist, I read a ton of obituaries. I often joke, my dad and I do family history together every Sunday night over a FaceTime call for about 3 or 4 hours. And the joke is that I read him obituaries like they're bedtime stories, because we make these discoveries and we're like, oh, I want to know more about this person, or I'm trying to find a connection to this family. And so obituaries are such a huge part of family history. But it wasn't until the end of 2020 when my aunt passed away, and my dad asked me if I would write her obituary. And it was the first obituary I'd ever written. Wow. And more than anything, I mean, this is a woman who never married, never had children of her own, but was so loved by the 12 of us who are her nieces and nephews, loved by her siblings. I mean, even the great nieces and nephews had just come to adore her. When can we go see Crazy Aunt Rhonda? They'd ask, right? She was loved by her employees. I mean, she ran a costume shop in Los Angeles, so you can only imagine, right? Like, just this life force, this woman. And my biggest fear was that was it, because she didn't have any children, that she was just going to be forgotten. And so when I was asked to write this obituary, it was so important to me that anybody who read it knew exactly who she was. And I went back to that thing in my mind about Covey and writing your obituary. And I thought, what if she was to write her own obituary? What would she write? And so that was kind of how I approached it. And this idea of, what are the 5 things you want to be remembered for? What are the 5 things you want to be known for? And so that's where I started, and I wrote them down. And then the story of her life unfolded in obituary format in a way that I just was so pleased with when I was done. Now, since then, I've been asked, my best friend's husband passed away last summer, and so I was able to help her write his obituary. My boss lost her mother just a few months ago. Like now apparently that's become a thing.
Another thing you do.
But this idea then just really turned in on me. I'm not married. I don't have children. I certainly don't want to write, like a whole obituary right now for myself, but I do want to know what those 5 words are. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. Like, how do I want to be known? And so my 5 words are graceful, faithful, passionate, inspiring, and loving.
And wow, I love it.
And that's it. And that's what I think about. And that's how I approach the world. And that's how I try to show up. And that's what I look for when I'm trying to tell the stories of my life. If that's how I want to be remembered, then then not only is that how I need to behave, but that's also the stories I need to be telling that demonstrate that.
Absolutely. So. And I love how your ancestor was inspiring you along the way as you were coming up with this process.
Yeah, for sure. She was inspiring in a lot of ways. For me, she showed me what was possible. And that's kind of what inspiring means to me, like somebody who is just an example of what's possible. Because I think so many times we get so many limiting beliefs thrown at us by the world. And so I look for that. I don't just look for that in her or in who I'm becoming, but I also look for that every time I sit down to do family history. Who in my family tree was inspiring, who was graceful, who was loving, who embodied those characteristics. And not only can I tell that story in my own life, but their stories live in me. And so how do I tell their stories better as well?
Absolutely. And what suggestions do you have for somebody who would also like to do that and tell those stories?
And do you kind of document those 5 things as you go along? Examples?
I try to. Yeah, I try to. So one of my favorite, can you have favorite ancestors?
Yes, we can. We do.
Okay, good.
Not you all, but.
Right. So of my 4 grandparents, only one of them is LDS. And And so when I embarked on my own family history journey at the age of 12, and then when I got more into it when I was in my 20s, and then finally it became my career, I never spent a ton of time on that branch of the family tree because the other three needed so much attention. And everybody else, was working on that one line. But I had this opportunity to go to Scotland for business. And I remember stepping off the train platform in Glasgow and just bursting into tears because I felt like I had come home. Like, I was like, what is, like, the only other time in my life I had felt that feeling twice. Once it was when I went through the temple for the first time. And I went through with my younger brother when he was getting ready to serve a mission and felt like I had come home. And then the second time was when I moved to Utah. I wasn't raised here, but I looked up at Mount Timpanogos and just felt like I had come home. And so I had that feeling in Scotland. And the gentleman that was there to meet me was a old professor at a university there in a sports coat and a cigar hanging out of his mouth and his thick Scottish brogue. And he says, what are you feeling? And I said, I feel like I've come home. And he said, well, welcome home to Scotland. You must have ancestors from here. And I said, I don't know. And he goes, aren't you a genealogist? Yeah, I am. Anyway, I found out that on this one branch of my family tree that I had never paid attention to, this one LDS grandparent, she had a great grandfather who was an immigrant from Scotland. He ended up in Kirtland and then he ended up in Nauvoo. He was called on the mission to England with the 12 apostles and was one of, of the 12 men called to go be their companions. There were only 2 that actually went, and he was one of the 2.
Do you remember his name?
Samuel Mulliner.
Oh yeah,
Samuel Mulliner and Alexander Wright were the 2 men that made it. And when they got there, Samuel said, "Well, my family just lives up in Scotland. Can I go visit them? I haven't been home in a few years." And then he wrote back to the mission and he said, I have a plan to preach the gospel of, from one end to the other of Scotland, if you'll allow me to stay here. And they did. And so he and Alexander became the first missionaries to Scotland, performed the first baptisms there. And that was all I needed to know. And I was hooked. And I became the student of his life and the faithful choices that he made. So much so that my mom and I ended up writing a book about him. So we wrote a biography about his life because we just kept finding stories of this example of faithfulness in his life. And that was just so not just important for me to know, but for me to make sure that every one of his descendants knew. Which then embarked on a whole project where I decided I'm going to see if I can trace all of his descendants. Well, he had 18 children and 98 grandchildren, so you can only imagine how quickly that blew up. I think we're over 10,000 descendants now.
Good luck with that one.
Right?
That's incredible. Oh, and all that devotion you have given to him and to others, I just know that they are so appreciative of that.
Yeah.
But there's something magical about the idea that somehow intrinsically inside us, we have this connection. For you to step off the platform in Scotland and feel that reverberate through your very soul without even knowing why. And look what it led to.
That was, right. That was back in, I think, like 2005. And so Ancestry didn't start doing DNA testing until 2012. And I remember when we did start doing DNA testing, all of a sudden I was finding all of these cousins that I hadn't found through all those years of research. They were just coming out of the woodwork. But I also had this really distinct impression that, we're walking around with pieces of those ancestors literally written in our DNA. And so I don't know how it all works necessarily, but I have this distinct impression often, not just that I feel their presence, not just that I'm, not that I'm just being influenced by them and that they're praying for me on the other side, but I am literally walking around with pieces of them and pieces of their story in me, written in the very code of my DNA. And the fact that we can then meet a place or meet a person or find a cousin that is also part of that same family and we share that piece of DNA. I think something about that speaks to our souls. I don't know how that communication works, but I really believe that it does.
Absolutely.
I picture him standing on that platform in Scotland and saying, finally, somebody's going to find out about this. And giving you a big hug when you stepped off the train. Saying, Crista, welcome home.
Yeah.
Tell my story. And you did.
I did. Yeah. Well, and he was very persistent, right? some ancestors, I think they're thrilled we find them, but they're, then they get on with whatever it is they're doing. For about 3 years, he was a constant presence in my life.
Mm.
And I just felt him constantly. And it wasn't just about telling his stories. It was also about gathering his family. Like I was the instrument for making sure that all of his descendants were named and numbered and accounted for. Like I was the instrument of the gathering for him. And as somebody for whom missionary work was such an important part of his identity, it was just a different kind of missionary work that he was asking me to engage in with him. And he was there with me the whole time.
Companions.
Over 2,000 descendants. Yeah, this is a chore.
Yeah, it was.
It took 3 years.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Oh.
What an interesting dynamic to invite people to think about what things do I really want to be remembered for. And I used to teach right next to Stephen Covey when I was teaching at BYU. We'd walk up the stairs together every Tuesday and Thursday in the Marb. And we talked often about some of those kind of things, but that idea about writing your obituary, or at least thinking what you want to be remembered for. And it's classically important. I mean, we were thinking about Elder Anderson's talk when he said, think about your spiritually defining moments and trust them and record them, believe them, and then share them with your family. That encouragement goes right along with what you just did.
Yeah.
And it made it possible for is it your great-great-grandfather?
Great.
3 times great.
3 greats. To have his chance to have all that recorded and shared. That's just, wow, what a gift that is.
That's right. And so what other ways can we share the stories once we write them and have them? What do you suggest?
You know what? I've been doing an interesting thing this year with my family. I've been sharing it in my Instagram stories. And so if people want to go see, I need to create like a little highlight bubble over there or something.
Please, everybody.
But one of the things I did for Christmas this year is I bought digital picture frames for my family. So I bought one for every household, and the picture frame was not the gift. Right? The gift was that I had spent some time over the course of the last year going through and creating a little story each week with pictures and maps and things I'd written, and so every week I upload new photos, or this new series of photos to the picture frames, and it gets pushed out to my nephew at college in Cedar and my parents in Portland, and my brother that lives here in Lehigh, and like all of these households that have this picture frame. And it is this story, and it just is like a slideshow, right? But
Wow.
for kids,
Perfect.
For kids who grew up with this in their hand, right? They're used to consuming information in 6 seconds or less, right?
Exactly.
So it gets them off their device, because I used to share a lot of stuff on social media, but then the younger kids didn't have devices, and so they missed out. And the older kids would sort of pay attention, but I never quite knew. And so in addition to having this, like today is my grandfather's birthday. He would have been 101 years old today. And so last night I put up pictures of him as a child, and they had to guess who it was. And so they had to text me when they figured out who it was. And then they had to tell me why, why his pictures were showing up this week. So today's his birthday. And then today, throughout the day, I'll put up pictures of him with, as a father and as a grandfather, and then pictures with each of them, and just being able to help them see. And then the last question that I put up on the picture frames was, ask your dad or your spouse their favorite memory of him, and text that to me. And I've already started getting texts this morning, and I'll start pushing those out on the picture frame as well. So now the stories that I'm collecting from the family of the memories of this person who was so important in our lives are being shared with this next generation who don't necessarily know him. And one of them's named after him. So
he needs to know him.
Right?
The digital tools we have are so remarkable, but I think they're underused or underutilized in this wonderful way that we share family heritage and legacy.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
And that's beautiful. Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a big deal. That's the thing. I think people think, oh, I have to write a story, and they stare at a blank page and they get overwhelmed. I literally am writing 6 words on a slide and turning that into a picture.
Yeah. Oh yes, I love that idea.
Or maybe 5 words on the slide.
Or 5. Yeah.
That's right.
Such
Oh
an
my
amazing idea.
goodness. And I just love how you have a story inside you that's coming out all the time. To your niece and your seven nephews.
6 nephews and the world's only niece.
That's like the world's only niece. I love it. And they have come to know that you will share those stories. And do you want to just talk a minute about how important it is for children to know their stories?
There's the famous Emory University study that was done back in the late 90s and that's been repeated. Ancestry actually then did a study in 2019 and then another one in 2021. And we discovered a really shocking statistic. It was that 56% of Americans cannot name all 4 of their grandparents.
Wow.
Right? And I understand how and why that happens, right? When you think about fractured families. I mean, I met a girl, 19-year-old, a few years ago who never, she's met her father once. She has no idea, she wasn't even sure what his name was when we were building her family tree. And we had to look up her parents' marriage record to get that. So this idea that we're so disconnected and fractured for a multitude of reasons, but that Emory University study is so rooted in this idea that children who grow up with a strong family narrative they have higher self-esteem, they get better grades, they're more resilient. There's so much to that. And all you have to do is share the stories. And the thing is, it doesn't even matter if they're great stories or terrible stories, right?
We can learn from both. That's right.
So just tell them, right? And one of the things that my sister-in-law does that I love so much is every time it's somebody's birthday, whether it's a kid, one of her kids or one of the adults in the family, we do 2 things. We sit around the table and everybody tells some favorite memory of that person.
I love that. And
so it reinforces even your own stories, of your history. And then she tells their birth story, which is, to the boys is always gross and disgusting and awful and whatever. But you know what? They wait for it every time it's their birthday.
They love it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
How big was I and how much pain did I cause you?
Yeah.
Oh, we've done some of that
important.
too.
Yeah, that we just keep telling the stories to those kids.
Absolutely. The family narrative, right? Just ongoing all the time. And, you are such a great example of that. And I'm sure that other family members have followed suit in some way because of your influence. And, you, in your own family, it's uncalculable. How do you say it?
That's a good.
Is that you can't calculate how much good you have done to influence those and give them this foundation and this connection that can change their lives and does change lives, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And then add to that sharing the spiritual heritage. I know the Emory study really gave us an idea about our traditional roots and our traditional stories. But when you add to that this dimension you found in Scotland, what you found from your great-great-great-grandpa about this other side of his life that was so much, it would have been one of his 5 things at least, or maybe 2 of his 5.
Yeah.
Would have been faithful disciple missionary,
right.
and all that.
Absolutely.
That just adds such additional strength to youth and everybody.
That's right. So keep the stories coming, everybody. And Crista, can you just give us just a few hints on how to write those stories, how to construct them, and
I think,
what to keep in mind?
Starting with those 5 words, I think, is a good place to start because then you're looking for those things.
Right.
And then think about things you could tell stories about. So I'll share a little bit about this at Roots Tech. I've actually got a presentation. It'll be live. I'll do an hour-long version live, but then I've got a half-hour pre-recorded version that'll be available later. But the idea is, can you tell the story of how your parents met? Do you have a favorite heirloom? Is there a spiritual highlight from your life or from the life of an ancestor? So lots of different topics we could write on. And then I always challenge people, can you tell that story in 2 words or less? Just what is the essence of it? And then can you tell it in a sentence that makes me want to know more? And that's the sneak peek of my anatomy of a story presentation. But
so good.
I think if you can do that, then you can build from there, and it's not as overwhelming.
We watched one of your presentations that people were writing in, and they said 2 words: blind date. How did my parents meet? Right. My cousin.
Yep.
We would have to say sacrament meeting.
Well, there you go.
We walked in our sacrament meeting, and that my life was changed forever right there. So,
and that is
There
a
you go.
famous story in our family. And with EFY, Crista
Right?
worked with EFY for years and years and influenced those youth. And she's also taught Institute, and she's spoken everywhere. And you know, we really can't get enough of Crista. The world
Well, you'll
can.
have to have me back.
we would
right.
love that.
We would absolutely love to have you back. And thank you so much for sharing today. This has been just enlightening and uplifting and informative.
It's been graceful, and we could go through 5 things.
Yeah.
It's been faithful, all of them. Yeah. Do you want to say anything in closing as this crazy
You know,
show?
just thank you for having me and giving me an opportunity to talk about some of the more tender and spiritual nature of family history. Just because of my role at Ancestry, I speak to people of all faiths, and I love that I get to do that, and I love the influence that I get to have. But I have such a strong testimony of the work of salvation that we're engaged in with family history, and of the help that's available to us from the other side of the veil. You know, they're praying for us, we're praying for them, we're looking for them, we're trying to tell their stories. But I just so appreciate the opportunity to share my testimony of that in a little bit more of a tender way and a little bit more of an overt way than I sometimes get to do. So thank you.
You've done a beautiful job of that. Please,
Thank you so
everyone,
much.
all of you viewers, please share this video with others and share the light of Crista Cowan.
And share your 5 words with
Yes.
your family.
Yes, I want to hear what they are.
Right there.
I want to hear what they are. Share it with
We want
us.
to hear what they are.
Thank you again for being with us. We love
Thanks
you.
so
Have a
much.
great day.